Welcome. I am Ms.N.S.Lavanya, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KCS Kasinadar College of Arts and Science. In this video, I have prepared a detailed answer key for first terminal examination under the title Introduction to Translation Study BRE5A, and the questions are taken from nook and corner of the subject. Have a look at the questions one by one. Section A. Answer all the multiple choice questions. First, John Dryden talks about three types of translation. Paraphrase refers to sense for sense translation. Intersemiotic translation means symbols. Formal equivalence is source oriented. Popovic gives beautiful definition to untranslatability. Cultural untranslatability is more difficult than linguistic untranslatability. Translation proper is otherwise known as interlingual translation. Semantic translation and communicative translation are concepts introduced by Peter Newmark. Saint Jerome translation of Bible was an example of word-for-word translation. The first complete English translation of the Bible was made by John Wycliffe. The authorized version of the Bible was published in 1611. Translating idioms comes under stylistic equivalence. Alexander Tytler wrote Essay on the Principles of Translation. Roman Jacobson said no ideal translation is possible. A equivalent is corresponding word or expression in another language. Horace and Cicero made distinction between word for word and sense for sense translation. Susan Bassnett divides translation studies into four areas of interest. Romans were accused of being unable to create imaginative literature on their own. Saint Jerome is the father of translation. Translation is in fact a science and an art, a combination of these two. Now, section B. Answer any 5 questions in about 200 words each. So the first question is, what is dynamic equivalence? Eugene Nida coined the term dynamic equivalence. It refers to the quality of translation in which the message of the original text has been so transported into the receptor language that the response of the receptor is essentially like that of the original receptor. Example, Nida quotes an example from the Bible where Lamb of God is rendered into seal of God for the Eskimos because lamb does not symbolize innocence in their culture. What is linguistic equivalence? Linguistic equivalence is nothing but word-for-word translation. It is achieved if the target language carries the same intended meaning or message that the source language carries. Example, the English word evening can either be translated as Soir in French, which are not same, but these terms are considered as equivalence by some theorists. Comment on adaptation. Adaptation is also known as free translation. It signifies the translator who substitutes cultural realities or scenarios for which there is no reference in the target language. Example, when translating Friday 13 from English to Spanish, the translator adapts to the cultural reality of the Spanish world and render it as Martes 13, which means Tuesday the 13th in Spanish. Adaptations or equivalents and can be seen clearly in the translations of movies or dramas where cultural and traditional references must be adapted for foreign audience. Adaptation is also explained when something specific to one language, culture, is expressed in a totally different way that is appropriate to another language culture. If translation meant communication of meaning, then adaptation meant to convey the same through adapting the translation for particular target audience. To make it clear, if greeting one another with a holy kiss is accepted in one culture, then it is rendered simply as greeting one another with handshake in another culture. The third question is, write on Popovic concept of untranslatability. Ans Popovic has attempted to define untranslatability without making a separation between the linguistic and cultural untranslatability. He defines the former as a situation in which the linguistic elements of the original cannot be replaced adequately in structural, linear, functional or semantic terms in consequence of a lack of denotation or connotation. He said the latter as a situation where the relation of expressing the meaning, that is, the relation between the creative subject and its linguistic expression in the original, does not find an adequate linguistic expression in the translation. Ans Popovic further distinguished another type of untranslatability, into which come the interesting everyday phrases such as bon appetit or Danish phrase for expressing thanks used to the host by the guest of the household after the meal, chalk for mat. The fourth question is, analyze Dryden concept of translation. In the preface to his translation of Ovid's Epistles, John Dryden, the first major English theorist in translation, points out three ways of translation, namely metaphrase, paraphrase and imitation. Metaphrase. This term refers to literal translation, that is, word by word and line by line translation. It is used only in translation theory. This term was first used by PhiloJudaeus in De Vita Moses. Paraphrase. This refers to a translation in which the contours of the original are attentively observed, but with a freedom which allows the translator to convey the spirit and sense rather than merely the letter of the original. Imitation. It departs from the original at the pleasure of the translator and really constructs a new poem on the basis of the old. Quintilian. The great theorist draws a distinction between metaphrase and paraphrase in the pedagogical practice of imitation and reworking of classical text. He remarks that metaphrase changes a word and paraphrase a phrase, a distinction that is also followed by Renaissance scholars. According to Dryden, paraphrase is the best method in translation. Explain the challenges faced by the translator. Most common challenges faced by the translator are translating language structure, translating idioms and expressions, translating compound words, missing names in translation, two-word verbs, multiple meanings in translation, translating sarcasm. Discuss Eugene Nida's views on translation. Nida defines translation as a process of reproducing the receptor language, the closest natural equivalent of the message of the SL, first in terms of meaning, second in terms of style. He classifies translation into three stages. Analysis. The surface structure of the SL text is analyzed in terms of sentential and supra-sentential features. Transfer. The analyzed material is transferred in the mind of the translator from SL kernel, that is deep structures, to TL deep structures. The next one is restructuring. The transferred material is restructured in order to make the message fully accepted in the target language. The final section is C. Answer any one of the following in about 300 words each. The first question is about Catford's theory of untranslatability. Untranslatability is a property of a text or of any utterance in one language for which no equivalent text or utterance can be found in another language. J.C. Catford, a celebrated translation scholar of linguistics school, raised the issue of untranslatability in 1965. He distinguishes two types of untranslatability: linguistic and cultural untranslatability. In linguistic untranslatability, it refers to translation difficulties to find equivalent lexical items in the TL. Cultural untranslatability. It refers to the translation difficulties that originate from the gap between the SL culture and the TL culture. Describe brief history of translation. The relationship between translation and nationalism shed light on the significance of differing concepts of culture. Bible translators were executed when they were avidly translating different kinds of text. George Steiner in After Babel divides the literature on the theory, practice and history of translation into 4 periods. The studies of past translation focused more on the influence on the effect of the TL product rather than on the process involved in the creation of the product. Wycliffe, Bible translator, stated that the translated text must be accessible by the common man. Tyndale attacked the hypocrisy of church authorities for forbidding lay people to read Bible in vernacular. King Alfred declared that the purpose of his translation was to rescue English people from Danish invasions. Roger Bacon discusses the problem of loss in translation, whereas Dante focuses more on the importance of accessibility through translation. Translation involves much more than an exercise in comparative linguistics. The function of translation, together with the function of learning, is changed. Jollette's principles stress the importance of understanding the SL text as a primary requisite. Hence, translator recreates the tone and the spirit of the original in the TL cultural context. Susan Bassnett clearly points out that the translator seeks to reproduce the transmigration of the SL text. The process of the enrichment of the literary system is an integral part of the Roman concept of translation. Hence, the translation by no means a secondary activity but a primary one, exerting a shaping force on the intellectual life of the age. I particularly thank 3rd BA English Literature students who took online classes very seriously and preparing well for the examination and continuously supporting me to prepare more videos for their better understanding. My dear diligent students, transmigrate this pandemic situation into a fruitful one by concentrating more on studies. All the best.